Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. Today, I'm going to be ranking metal sellout albums. These are albums that I just want to say up front, I don't agree with the term sellout. I think it has a bad connotation to it, right? It really depends on the record, in my opinion. But, the term sellout has been used to describe a band changing their sound to adapt with the times or, altering their sound to a more radio-friendly direction. And so all of these albums here have been accused of that. I'm not calling all of these albums sellouts, but they are considered by the vast majority of the metal community to be sellout records. But, again, there are some bad connotations that come with that word. How bad are these albums really? We're going to be using the tier list here today. We've got the S tier for the best of the best tier, the A tier, B, C, and D tier, and then I added the F tier for just the truly worst of the worst offenses here on this list. And like everything else on the channel, these are all just my opinions. So how bad are these perceived sellout albums really? Well, I'm going to share my thoughts here today. Let's get started. Let's kick things off here with Force of Habit by Exodus. Metallica became the poster child for thrash bands who commercialized their sound in the 90s, probably because they were the most successful at it, but tons of other thrash counterparts also tried to commercialize at some point in the decade, and that includes Exodus. And, Force of Habit is an album that people have been talking about again since this past Friday when Exodus' newest record kind of drew comparisons as their most experimental since, and this was, of course, a pretty striking departure for Exodus at the time, right? Songs are slower, they're more accessible, and, groove metal oriented, and people write this album off, and I really enjoy tracks on here, even though it's no Bonded by Blood, like standouts such as Thorn in My Side, Me, Myself, and I, Force of Habit, Fuel for the Fire, One Foot in the Grave, When It Rains It Pours, Good Day to Die is a great song. If you have the expanded edition here, it was reissued. It also has Telepathic and Crawl Before You Walk, which is some good stuff here too. And I'd say the biggest criticism I have of this record is the runtime. 68 minutes on the original, 77 minutes on the reissue. I think there's some definite filler on here that could have been trimmed down for sure. But, other than that, I really do enjoy this record. And so where would I put it on this tier list? I'm going to put this somewhere in the B tier. Next up, we've got Cold Lake by Celtic Frost. I'm really tired of talking about this album, really. I mean, Tom G. Warriors called it one of the worst things he can do in his life, and I mean, it's pretty bad. It's not like he killed somebody, except for the trust of Celtic Frost fans everywhere. But, this is a totally correct use of the word sellout, in my opinion, to a more commercial, late 80s hair metal sound, abandoning their extreme metal roots, and everything that made records like, Into the Pandemonium and To Megatherion so special in the first place. This is Celtic Frost's rock bottom, so let's put it there, all the way down in the F tier. After that here, we've got Falling Into Infinity by Dream Theater. This record gets so much unnecessary hate. It's a product of the band feeling rushed and pressured into making a more commercially accessible album, but that said, there are still some proggy moments on here. More importantly, a great mix of, rockers on this record, like New Millennium, You Not Me, Burning My Soul, right? I mean, Lines in the Sand is great. And then also you have some great ballads on here, which feature some of James LaBrie's best vocals, right? Songs like Hollow Years, Anna Lee, Take Away My Pain, some great songs. And so this is a really overlooked record in my opinion. Some killer solos from John Petrucci as always, and some cool harmonies on here between James LaBrie and Mike Portnoy as well. Really never understood why people, dunk on this record. It's one of my personal favorites from the Dream Theater catalog, and definitely their most underrated album in my opinion. So this one goes in the A tier for sure. Black Faith by Cancer. I'm starting to warm up to this record here, but it's not the kind of thing I want to hear when, you're browsing the Cancer catalog. It's kind of like the band were trying to mesh load-era Metallica with Heartwork, and the results are nothing close to either record, in my opinion. It's groovy and industrial, some good under-celebrated riffs on here from Barry Savage for sure, not to the level of their past work, and even if you look at it as a separate entity from the rest of the Cancer catalog, production really hurts it, and most of the record suffers from mediocrity, in my opinion, and it's never a good sign when your best song on the album is a cover, and that, of course, being Space Truckin' by Deep Purple. So let's put this one in the C tier. Oh boy, Dynasty by Kiss from 1979. Of course, the album where Kiss alienated a lot of longtime fans by pursuing a disco-tinged sound in an attempt to bridge the divide between rock and disco fans and profit from both of the markets. And it may have succeeded at the time in bringing in tons of new, young fans, but ultimately marked the beginning of the end for Kiss's legendary run of records and their popularity in the 70s. And personally, I never need to hear I Was Made for Lovin' You again. I usually skip it at this point and just start this record at 2000 Man. Ace Frehley rules this album with more songs than Gene, coming off the success of his 78 solo record. And, aside from the opener, and I mentioned 2000 Man, which is awesome, I love every song on here. Some great cuts on here, like Sure Know Something, Dirty Livin' by Peter Criss. Fantastic song. We always love the cat on this channel, but this is one of his best in my opinion. Charisma, Magic Touch, Hard Times, X-Ray Eyes, all really good stuff. It's a hated album, but I think it's aged pretty well. So with that being said, it's always been a Kiss album that I've enjoyed. Maybe if I was there in 1979 and was at the heart of, the Disco Sucks thing, I would have felt differently. But for me, I'm going to put this in the A tier. Risk by Megadeth. I'm just not interested in hearing Dave Mustaine try and fail over and over again to write a radio hit. And that's pretty much what Risk is. It's a boring record that goes nowhere. Prince of Darkness is a great song, but otherwise, a lot of these tracks are forgettable, and the lyrics feel juvenile, especially to, some of Dave's songwriting on, the last few albums there that Megadeth had done. And, I feel like it's not on the same level of suck as, say, a Cold Lake. So I'm not going to put this one in the F tier, but I do think the D tier is fair. Next up is probably the one album that comes to mind immediately for this topic, synonymous with the term selling out. And that's, of course, self-titled The Black Album by Metallica. And, it's funny, I had a professor once who was a huge thrash fan, and he told me that when the Black Album came out, he bought it, he played it in the car on the way home, and then he threw the disc out the window after the first 3 songs. But, I know a lot of people felt that way. It's a safe, radio-friendly adaptation of the Metallica sound orchestrated by Bob Rock, and this was the end of thrashy Metallica, and people who, thought they knew the band, from, the Injustice for All era through Kill 'Em All. And while I probably never need to hear the radio hits on here again, I can't deny this record was a huge part of me getting into Metallica. I think a lot of people can relate to that too. It's a great gateway album, and I have really no problem with the Black Album, although I gravitate towards some of the deeper tracks on here more so now. Songs like Holier Than Thou, Don't Treat on Me, Through the Never, Wolf and Man, The God That Failed, My Friend in Misery, stuff like that. So, even though it might be unpopular, this is an A-tier record for me. Innocence is No Excuse by Saxon. This is Saxon now signed to a major label attempting to commercialize their sound more in like with, the Def Leppards of the world by 1985. And needless to say, they didn't enjoy the same level of success. It's not as good as the band's influential new wave of British heavy metal material, but there's still some really good hooks on here. I think it's a fun album with standouts like Rock and Roll Gypsy, Broken Heroes, which is one of my favorite Saxon songs, Back on the Streets, Devil Rides Out, and Rockin' Again to open up the album. This one gets way too much hate in my opinion, so for that I think it's pretty underrated. So let's put this in the B tier. Coming up next, we have Sound of White Noise by Anthrax, the band's first album with Armored Saint vocalist John Bush and the band replacing Joey Belladonna. And Anthrax were going for a more serious alternative metal sound here. John Bush sounds great, and although the Bush era kind of fell off in the albums that followed, things started out really strong, and this is a top 5 Anthrax record for me. There's standouts on here like Potter's Field, Only, Room for One More, Package Rebellion, Invisible, Black Lodge. So many great songs on here, and I was going to put this in the A tier, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put it all the way up in the S tier because Black Lodge and Room for One More are just too good. Hysteria by Def Leppard. This is where Def Leppard starts to lose me completely. I'm not a fan of the glossy, super polished, ballad-driven Def Leppard. I love their first couple albums. It's some great new wave of British heavy metal, but the band opted for a more commercial sound, and who can blame them? They made a ton of money, but I've heard these songs to death on classic rock radio against my will, and they just bore me to tears. Love Bites is the longest 5-minute song of all time, and getting through it is like having a root canal, so I'm going to put this one in the C tier, even though it's a pretty universally beloved album. Black Acid Devil by Danzig. Specifically, this is Danzig 5. And, Danzig's first 4 solo records that preceded this are all metal essentials, right? After Danzig 4, he started to make some questionable decisions, including becoming a Nine Inch Nails cover band with Black Acid Devil, and production on here is poor, and Glenn sounds completely out of place in his industrial environment, but that said, I actually really dig songs on here. Tracks like The House, Black Acid Devil, See All You Were, Sacrifice, which is just like the most Nine Inch Nails song not written by Nine Inch Nails. Got a great cover of Hand of Doom. I love Jerry Cantrell's guitar work here as well, and always have to mention that Hand of Doom cover, very underrated stuff. Black Acid Devil is nowhere near the level of the first 4 Danzig records, nor is it, anywhere near his best stuff, but this has always been, one of those guilty pleasure albums for me, so I really enjoy it for some reason. Maybe it's my inner Nine Inch Nails fan coming out, I'm not really sure, but let's go ahead and put this at a B tier. Eat the Heat by Accept. I hate this record. I've talked about this album to death. I'm tired of talking about it. Accept should have never gone glam metal. This is F tier easily. Next, in thrash bands who commercialized in the 90s, we have Quattro by Flotsam and Jetsam. Quattro builds on the progressive technical experimentation introduced on When the Storm Comes Down, shifting towards a slower pace with a slightly more melodic style, and also features the message co-written by Chris Cornell of Soundgarden. I love, of course, the fast-paced, Flotzilla thrash metal material, but this album showed a ton of growth for the band. It's more commercial and definitely easier for non-thrash fans to digest, but it's some of their most mature work for me, and so, you know what? I'm going to put this one in the A tier. Angry Machines by Dio, more like Angry Dio fans. Ronnie got caught up in the industrial craze of making, really angry music in the 90s, but Dio was one of those guys who really never needed to change his sound in the first place. Ronnie's vocals and lyrics are timeless stuff, in my opinion, and going industrial didn't sell him any more records. Angry Machines is his lowest point for sure, and outside of the album closer, This Is Your Life, this is not an album I go back to much. It takes, the entire record just to get to one good song on here, in my opinion, so let's put this in the D tier. Coming up next, Turbo by Judas Priest. Priest going synth here in the mid-80s is a different sound and image from Defenders of the Faith and the band's previous albums to this point. Band, of course, had done genre-defining work up to this mark here, and this is very much a product of its time. Turbo and Ram It Down originally recorded together and intended to be released as twin turbos. They were, of course, then released as 2 separate records, but it's a polarizing era of Priest for sure. I think Turbo is much stronger than Ram It Down, personally. It's a really fun record, I think. There are some standout tracks on here that I really enjoy, like Turbo Lover, Locked In, Out in the Cold is great, made for a great opener on that tour as well. Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days, Rock You All Around the World is okay, and then you just have some embarrassing songs, like Private Property or Parental Guidance. So, definitely some misses on here, but, there are some really enjoyable songs on here as well. Rob Halford's vocals sound more laid back, but it's still a pretty solid record. This gets a B for me. The Unspoken King by Cryptopsy. Cryptopsy going deathcore, and, I give them credit for experimenting with something new. I dig some of the more progressive elements on here, and some fantastic drumming as well. Is it the worst Cryptopsy record? For sure, but it's not a terrible record either. Just not, the tactical death metal that we're expecting from the band at this point. Let's put it in the B tier for now. It's probably a C tier Cryptopsy album, but overall, as a deathcore record, it's a solid B. Love Is for Suckers by Twisted Sister. This is the last gasp for air from a dying band by this point. Twisted Sister's commercial decline really should be studied for years to come. I mean, they never could match the same level of mainstream success as Stay Hungry, and after the criminally overlooked Come Out and Play record underperformed, the band were not getting along, their audience was shrinking, Dee Snider shaved his teeth into fangs. I mean, the whole thing was a sinking ship, and that's when they sold out in one last-ditch attempt to hold it all together. And despite being lumped in with, the hair bands of the 80s due to their image, they always had a much heavier sound. On Love Is for Suckers, though, the band opt for a bland, by-the-book glam metal album, and it just feels lifeless. The only great song on here is the opener, Wake Up the Sleeping Giant. Everything else on this record feels like a shell of the former Twisted Sister, and this is going to go in the D tier for me. I think Sleeping Giant is the only thing on here keeping it from F tier damnation. Ugh, Grave New World by Discharge. An album so bad it almost started a riot when the band tried to play it live. HR from Bad Brains even dunked a bucket of ice on the band from the balcony because it was so bad. Someone had to cool these guys off because they were completely in over their heads here and trying the whole glam metal sound. It's just the most unpunk thing you could possibly do, especially at the time. And Cal Morris's vocals are just nails on a chalkboard here. This whole thing is a huge middle finger to all the fans it alienated, and it just sounds and feels like a completely different band. So this is going straight to the bottom in the F tier where it belongs. From 1997, KFD by Wasp. Now, I never considered this album to be a sellout, but apparently some people do, since Wasp, totally changed their sound and image for a more sinister industrial edge that, if we're being honest, made Marilyn Manson wet himself. And this is one of the angriest metal records of all time for sure. The production is not great, but that's intentional, to create a really noisy, fuzzy sound. This also marked the return of the Mean Man, Chris Holmes, who brought back some, really interesting out there riffs to the table, I think. And this is an extremely underrated record, somewhere for sure in my top 5 Wasp albums. So maybe unpopular, but this is going all the way up to the S tier for me. And last but not least, here we have Load by Metallica from 1996. Double Metallica on this list, not because I really believe they sold out, but people seem to have a special hatred for both the Black Album and Load. 2 stylistic changes in a row by the band, who took the commercial sound from the Black Album, now with the freedom to do whatever they wanted, and experimented with southern rock, country, blues rock, and more. And I don't even think that's the biggest offense on here in terms of, how metal fans see things. I think the fact that they cut their hair is probably the worst thing here. But I love this record, as a matter of fact. I love the album's diversity. I think the band pulled it off really well. It doesn't feel forced at all. It feels kind of like the band just jamming, doing whatever they want at this point. This record, I think, has aged really well, and it's cool to see that a lot of people who might have been caught off guard by it in 96 have really grown to enjoy it over the years. This is a top 5 Metallica album for me, with some of their best lyrics on tracks like The House Jack Built, Until It Sleeps, King Nothing, Hero of the Day, Bleeding Me, Mama Said, The Outlaw Torn to close things out. This goes all the way up for me into the S tier. So there you have it, using Tier Maker here to rate albums that are generally considered to be sellout albums by a majority of the metal community here. Do you agree? Are these albums sellouts or not? There are a few that I'm not really sure I agree with here, but what I wanted to do was kind of talk about the stigma that commercial albums have. Is it necessarily always a bad thing? Well, I think in the case of some of these records, absolutely not. There are some that are ranked much higher than others, and there are some at the bottom of the barrel that absolutely deserve to be there. But nonetheless, you thought it would be interesting and something different here on the channel to try and use Tier Maker. Let me know down in the comment section below if that's something you want to see more of here on the channel. I want to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload. Follow me on Instagram at the CD Guy JZ. And until next time, it's the CD Guy Johnny Z signing off. Take care, everybody.